I was here last October to talk about a major world event, and that major world event was 500 years ago, and that was the Reformation. That really changed the world. It split Christianity in two. So nowadays we have half of Christendom Roman Catholic and half not Roman Catholic. That was 500 years ago. Today I'll talk about another world event, major world event, that happened in our lifetime, 70 years ago. There was one that is very clear, we all know that. There was a real standoff between two guys who really couldn't stand each other. One was President Kennedy, the other one was Khrushchev, and that was in the early 60s, the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's the Cuban Missile Crisis. It was two guys, and we were wondering who is going to blink first. In that case, Khrushchev was not known to be a blinker, but Khrushchev called up the ships and told them, make a U-turn and go back to Russia, because those ships were full of missiles destined for Cuba. I'm not going to talk about that. I will talk about an earlier one that took place in '48. And that was a standoff too. And the standoff was, who's going to blink first? It was President Truman and the fellow we all know his name, Stalin, Joseph Stalin. They were looking at each other. Who is going to blink? Who is going to start World War III? It was as tense as the Cuban Missile Crisis. Some people have forgotten about it, but it was a real standoff. And what happened is, what caused that crisis was Churchill and Roosevelt and Stalin got together at Yalta in February of '45, before the war was over, to decide what are we going to do with Germany. Germany is going to be defeated in another 3 or 4 months. The war in Europe is going to be over. What are we going to do with Germany? What are we going to do with Berlin? That was Hitler's headquarters. How are we going to divide up the world? So they decided, those three decided, okay, we'll divide up Germany. The eastern part of Germany goes to Russia, Soviet Union. The southern part of Germany, Bavaria and all that area, goes to the US. Each one, the northern part will go to the British. Each zone will be controlled, will be run by a 4-star general. Eisenhower was out of the picture at that point already because he won the war. He took off his 5 stars and he came back to the States. So there were 3 generals. Then they said, well, you know, actually the French, they lost some soldiers too. So why don't we Americans give up a little bit of our area of Germany? And the British said, we'll give up a little bit of our area so the French could occupy part of Germany. That part was mostly the Black Forest, Freiburg, that area, and a little bit of the Saarland. But the majority was the Soviet Union, the US, and British. So, and then they said, well, how about Berlin? What are we going to do with Berlin? That is right in the middle of the Russian zone, So, what's going to happen to that? They said, well, Berlin, we're going to divide into 4 sectors: the American sector, the French sector, British sector, American sector. 4 zones. You probably have seen that sign, you are now leaving the American, checkpoint Charlie, you are now leaving the American sector. And then in French, and in Russian, and the bottom in German, small print. So this thing that in the middle of the Russian zone, and Moscow controlled that, right in the middle of this huge part of East Germany is Berlin with American GIs stationed in it. 7,000 GIs, 3,000 British soldiers, and 2,000 French soldiers. 12,000. That was a real thorn in the eye of Stalin. He hated it. The idea that I have 12,000 foreign troops in my zone in Berlin stationed, how do I get rid of them? Well, I could shoot them, and that would have been very easy because the Americans and the French were outnumbered 10 to 1. There was 100,000 Russian troops around Berlin, 100 combat troops, and tanks, and artillery. So 100,000 around it, 12,000 inside. How do I get rid of them? Well, if I shoot them, the American government is not going to just sit back and say, well, it's a shame we just lost 7,000 troops, because Stalin went in to shoot them. So Stalin said, I can't do that, I can't shoot them, but I can make life so unbearable for them, for the American GIs in West Berlin, that the Americans will throw them out. The Americans will say, the hell with Berlin, we don't need it, we won the war, we don't want to start another war. So I'll make it so unbearable for the Americans and the French and the British that they'll say, okay, we'll pull them out. So I said, what can I do to make life so unbearable? Everything had to be shipped into West Berlin for the supplies, for the West German population, and for the American GIs and the French, either by train. There were numerous tracks going into Berlin from West Germany. By highway, there were numerous interstate highways from Hanover, from Munich, from Frankfurt, from Hamburg going in. The heavy stuff, like heating oil and coal, was shipped in by barges. There were many canals going into West Berlin from West Germany. He said, what I'll do is, I'll starve them to death. I'll cut off all means of getting into Berlin. If they cannot get the flour and the bread and the flour and the milk and whatever, potatoes and medicine, whatever they need, that they're going to just throw up. So it's a matter of, so what he did is, he took Russian tanks and blocked the Autobahn. Autobahn is an interstate highway. Nothing would get through. He took Russian tanks and blocked all the railroad tracks going in. Then he took Russian ships and blocked the canals. So all the heavy stuff couldn't get in. Whoa, now what? Are these Americans will they be evacuated? So it was a matter of who's going to blink first, President Truman or Stalin, a real standoff. So the commander of the American forces at that time was General Lucius Clay, 4-star general. He called up Washington and said, look, we cannot just evacuate and abandon West Berlin, we have to fight. And you fight to get ready for a major invasion from West Germany into Berlin to liberate the troops. What does it take? So the Pentagon came back and said it's going to take 18 months. 18 months of preparation of getting US tanks over there, to get the artillery ready, to get the infantry ready. It's going to take several divisions because the Russians are not just going to sit there. So to really break through, 18 months. Clay, the general, said, 18 months, they're all going to be dead. I mean, we have to do something right now. So Truman said, well, what do you suggest, General? He said, the only thing we can do is an airlift, the Berlin airlift. We're going to have to fly everything in, because the Russians are not going to shoot down an American plane, an Air Force plane. I mean, that's the last thing they know, that's going to be World War III. And at that time, the Soviets did not have the atomic bomb. So it would have been very easy for us to win that war. And Stalin knew it. They have the atomic bomb. They already set off 2 in Japan. If I start a war, they're going to set one off in Moscow, in Leningrad, and so on. So that's not going to work. So then the question was, okay, how are we going to fly all this stuff in? So President Truman said, okay, General, go ahead, start the airlift. Well, for the airlift, they needed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of planes. So there was agreed there would be corridors from Berlin to West Germany, air corridors, where the Allies could fly. Nobody else could fly. That's it. And Italian Airlines, nobody. Only American planes could fly in. So he said, all right, we have to get all the planes we can get. We have to get their excess planes in Hawaii, fly them to Germany. Their planes in Alaska, fly them to Germany. Mostly DC-3s. The military nomenclature was C-47. And then 2 propeller machines, cargo planes. The next ones, bigger ones, were C-54, 4 propeller machines, cargo planes. So every plane that the US had, everyone was flown to Germany. Now comes the part, we got all these planes, we got the pilots. How are we going to fly them in? A DC-3 can only hold, can transport 3 tons. The C-53, they could hold 13 tons of material. Well, we need thousands. Berlin, West Berlin, was about twice the size of Manhattan, area-wise, population-wise. So can you imagine what it takes to supply a city twice the size of Manhattan with daily food, with fuel, with diesel fuels for the electricity, for the generators? I mean, it was a humongous. Said, no, there's no way we can do it. So they said, well, let's try. So they tried. So the planes started from Frankfurt and from Wiesbaden. Wiesbaden was another Air Force base in Germany. And they flew. And they flew to get them all in. There was only one airport at that time, Tempelhof, 2 runways. So to get them in, the plane took off from Frankfurt, flying at 8,000 feet. The next one took off, flying at 10,000 feet. 3 minutes later, the next one took off at 12,000 feet. The next one took off at 14,000 feet. So you had 5 layers of planes taking off. The first one at the first level, 15 minutes later, the next one off. Then 15 minutes, the next one off. So you had the whole sky full of military cargo planes flying to Berlin, fully loaded. Then the British, they said, well, we have to contribute too. The French had no planes. The French had all their planes in Indochina because they didn't want to give up Indochina. Indochina, what's now Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. So they used all their planes there because that was a French colony, and the French didn't want to lose their colony. So the British said, okay, we'll fly in from a British air base north of Hanover. So the British start flying in. So you have all these planes coming in. It took like, I think 600 air traffic controllers, because they were flying day and night. 2 o'clock in the morning, a plane took off. At 2:03, a plane took off. At 2:06, a plane took off. All day long. Can you imagine that? All day long. And then they said, well, it's still not enough. We have now 2 airports, the big American airport, a little French airport. We have to build a 3rd. There is no way we can do it because winter comes, these people are going to freeze to death. We need coal, we need diesel fuel, we need gasoline. So then what they did is, they said, okay, well, were we going to build one? So in the French sector, there was a big park, a little bit like Central Park. They said, this is a place. We'll change that park into an airstrip. And that is called Tegel Airport, and it's still open today. So if you fly United to Berlin, you land in Tegel. Of course, now it's a civilian airport. It's different than it was then. In that time, it was only military. But we need people. We need lots of people to build it. So they said, General Clay said, all right, we'll pay $1 a day and a warm meal. And that was important, the warm meal. The dollar was good, $1 a day. So who signed up for that? Mostly women. 20-year-old, 30-year-old, 40-year-old, 50-year-old with wheelbarrows, hauling rocks, hauling sand to make a landing strip at Tegel. I mean, and why did the women do it? And not so much the men? Because the men, they were still POWs, prisoners of war. In the Soviet Union, many German prisoners were sent over here, soldiers. They were in France, they were in England, so it was mostly women. And the thing that really got them excited was a hot meal. Potato soup with a piece of bacon in it or some pork or whatever. So that was mostly built by women. Now the problem was that for that landing strip in Tegel, you also needed thick metal plates. So when the planes come down, they don't blow a tire by hitting the rocks. So big metal plates had to be put down, and for that you need basically bulldozers and backhoes, equipment. Well, none of that equipment could fit into these planes, so they had to cut them apart into 4 or 5 pieces in Frankfurt, put them apart, load them in the plane, unload them in Berlin, and in Berlin they had some good welders, and they welded it together again. So now all of a sudden you had equipment to do it, to weld these big metal plates together, to weld the bulldozers together. So all of a sudden, it worked. Well, Stalin got a little bit worried to see how all this works. But he wasn't ready to throw in the towel yet. So at one point, when it was right at the peak, they had 1 plane a minute landing in Berlin. 1 plane a minute, either at the Tegel in the French zone, or in the British zone, or the American zone. Americans did 80% of the work. The British did about 20%. Again, they didn't have that many planes. So then there was one. So they finished, and the thing is, they finished an entire airport, no passengers. An entire airport they finished, Tegel, they finished in 3 months. 3 months, they had 2 runways laid down, planes coming in day and night, at 2 in the morning, 2 at 2:01, at 2:02, at 2:03, at 2:04, all day long. So the one American lieutenant, Air Force lieutenant, he thought actually it would be a nice gesture. He said, you know, every time I come in for a landing on a Saturday or Sunday when the kids don't have school, I see all these German kids lined up at the runway, looking at the big American planes coming in, delivering it. And you know, some of them look kind of hungry and not too happy. So I said, you know what I'll do? He tried something. He said, I'll take a bed sheet and cut it in half, and then I attach some strings to it, and on the bottom, I make a little gift basket. So I make a little parachute. Little parachute, and then the gift in that little basket, maybe just a handkerchief, a big handkerchief, I'll put in a Hershey bar, and I put in some Planters peanuts, and I'll put in some raisins, these sun-dried, sun-kissed raisins from California, and some chewing gum. And just before I come in for a landing, I open the cargo door and I throw it out. Well, all of a sudden the kids were, whoa, what's coming down here? It's white, it looks like a parachute, never seen that before. They ran, and it was all edible stuff, all the kind of stuff that the kids really wanted. So then it went up the chain of command. Is that really according to SOP, standard operating procedure, to open a cargo door and to throw out parachutes with stuff for the kids? It went up to General Lucius Clay, and it says, go for it. And once he gave the permission, thousands of parachutes every day from most planes, not at night because at night the kids were sleeping, but all day, thousands of parachutes came down from the sky with food in it. And the kids, you know, what they had, especially these sun-dried raisins, they said, oh, here comes another. They called them Rosinenbombe. A rosine is a raisin bomber, and that was a big success. That was a humongous success, having these raisins come down. Well, the little packages, it was thousands of them every day that they prepared in Frankfurt, and then they dropped them off. So then it was after 9 months of doing this, finally, the Soviet Union said it was Joseph Stalin facing Truman who threw in the towel and blinked. Okay, I give up. I give up. I remove my tanks from the railroad tracks. I remove my tanks from the Autobahn. I remove my ships. Free access to Berlin again. Now, what did it cost? That Berlin airlift, there were 17 US planes that crashed because they flew in the fog. It was heavy fog and they were coming in. Well, one American pilot, he thought that was Tempelhof, the airport. He was coming in for a landing, and then all of a sudden he realized, it's not Tempelhof, it's a Kudamm. Because the Kudamm was lit up. Kudamm was like Fifth Avenue. So instead of, and at that point it was too late. He couldn't pull up anymore. He touched down and boom, smashed into an apartment house. Of course, both pilots got killed, but a few people in the apartment house got killed.